This is Dr. Rich Schuttler with my program titled Taking the B Out of ABD. That stands for Taking the Butt Out of All But Dissertation. This information is on Chapter 3. Other information and lessons are already provided on Chapters 1 and 2. If you haven't seen those yet, you can find that at my website at www.drrichschuttler.com under Taking the B Out of ABD. This is the first lesson in Chapter 3, titled Introduction. In this program, I'll give an introduction to this lesson. I'll address what is Chapter 3 in your proposal and dissertation. I'll talk about how it fits into your proposal and dissertation. I'll give an idea of a possible sequence that you might find helpful to put your chapter in from beginning to end as far as headings and subheadings. I'll also address several important areas that can help you better understand how to put your chapter together. Then I'll have a brief discussion on what methodology means in regards to this chapter, and I'll conclude it with a reflective summary. This program is what I believe to be easy how-to steps. This program is designed specifically to help you better understand how each chapter goes together and what content goes where, and in each heading and subheading what is expected at most universities. This program is designed around my background. I'm Dr. Rich Schuttler, and I have been doing dissertation work for over 13 years as both a dissertation chair and committee member. I also served for a number of years as a dean at the University of Phoenix, where I was accountable for signing dissertations approved or not approved on behalf of the university. I also do research in my consulting work as well. All the lessons that I provide here are from my experience. They're lessons learned that I've gained from doing my work, working with my mentees, also from the time when I was at the university. And of course, since I do research on a regular basis with clients in my professional life, I also bring that experience to you here as well. I do believe that if you know the expectations, you can meet and exceed them. Oftentimes what I hear in Chapter 3, as well as some of the other chapters, that the expectations are not clear, or that it's like a moving target. It's not the same all the time, or one faculty member doesn't like it one way where another one does. While that's all understandable to a certain extent, I do believe if you know the basics and you know what those expectations are, you can meet them and certainly exceed them if you care to make your work truly not only an outstanding research study, but a significant, substantial doctoral dissertation. What is Chapter 3? Well, I believe Chapter 3 is the easiest chapter in the proposal to write. In fact, I believe it's the easiest chapter up through any of the work that you've done so far if you're working on your proposal. It's easier than a concept paper, it's easier than a prospectus, it's easier in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. I do believe that Chapter 2 is the hardest. But Chapter 3, it's pretty much about giving the reader an understanding of exactly what you're going to do, the process, if you will, the step-by-step process once you're approved to collect your data. This is nothing that's unusual from one dissertation to the next. Matter of fact, if you go and do a research on ProQuest dissertations online and look at 2 or 3 dissertations that are published from your university in the last couple of years with the same research and method that you plan to apply, you'll probably see that you can use their table of contents as a good roadmap for how you would or should construct your Chapter 3. In Chapter 1, you had to put a lot of sections together that you really didn't understand. You had to put the problem statement together and the purpose statement, of which you did not know how to do originally. You had to decide what research method and design you were going to use, the research question. There was a lot of refinement work. That was challenging. Chapter 2, I believe, was even more challenging because you have no guideline there, basically, to put your work together because every chapter is unique and even of itself. So therefore, you had to do all the literature. You had to put it into a format. You had to perhaps use a research map or some other tool like a mind map to be able to give you information on how to put it together in a logical flow. That was challenging. It was taking your creative abilities and skills and putting it into a linear process. Here in Chapter 3, it's very linear. Literally, what are you going to do from beginning to end to collect your data? And I'm going to share some of those insights as I go through this lesson. And of course, the follow-on lessons for Chapter 3 will go into each section in detail. What is Chapter 3? Well, in the proposal, Chapter 3 basically describes how the data will be collected. Think of it this way. You have to tell somebody how you're going to collect your data, why you're going to do each step, and the rationale for each step. For example, if you're going to do a pilot test, you have to say not only that you're going to do a pilot test, but how many people you anticipate being in the pilot test. Why are you doing a pilot test? Why are you selecting 5 people to be in your pilot test instead of 10 if you're going to have 5? How will you take the information from the pilot and then apply that towards your actual survey that you're going to use for your survey population? All these different questions come into play, and you have to tell people all these details. In the dissertation, once your proposal is approved and you've done all your data collection, Chapter 3 then becomes the information that describes how the data was collected. Oftentimes, dissertations, when they're published, the Chapter 3 has to change because in your proposal, you're just suggesting what's going to happen and it hasn't occurred yet. Whereas in the dissertation, now it's all completed and there may have been some differences. For example, if you had indicated that you were going to survey 350 people and that your anticipation was to get 125 usable surveys, but you only ended up with 100 usable surveys, that doesn't mean you have to continue on. It doesn't mean that your dissertation is no good. It means that now you have to describe in the chapter exactly what happened, because needless to say, you did not get the amount of surveys back that you had hoped to. Nothing wrong with that. Or you may say that after the first round of collection that you only had perhaps 100. Now you decide to do a second round to get more people, and you provided a gift for anybody who would participate in the second round. Therefore, now, since you have done the second round to get more surveys, which is certainly likely and certainly expectable in that situation, now you would write Chapter 3 to reflect exactly what happened. This is not a big deal, as I might call it. All it is taking your Chapter 3 from the proposal, and if there were any changes, then you actually change it and amend it. As long as there are minor changes. If something changed and it's major, you may have to go back and get your proposal reapproved. Now, that's unlikely in most cases, and if that case should happen to you, well, of course, your dissertation chair will guide you in that manner. But more than likely, if you set up your proposal fine, if you did the preliminary work to be able to identify who would be in your survey population and get consent from those who you need it, then more than likely everything's going to be fine. And there'll be some perhaps just minor changes. In the proposal, it's written in a manner that someone else could pick it up and do the same research the same way, knowing the rationale for each step. Think of it this way. Once your proposal is approved, and for some reason you couldn't do the research. Let's just say, for example, you ended up being hospitalized and you couldn't do the work, but you wanted to get done nonetheless. Well, somebody else who has your basic knowledge should be able to pick up your proposal, read Chapter 3, and do the research the exact same way you would have. And knowing why they're doing each step that is prescribed in that chapter. If you do it to the level of detail that somebody else could literally pick it up and do the work in each step as you would have done, then you would have known at that point you had a good Chapter 3. The most important thing I'll talk about throughout this lesson and every lesson that's going to be a common theme in Chapter 3 is what I call excruciating details. Chapter 1 did require some detail, not the level of detail that's required here. Now, Chapter 2 was very informational. That may not have been as detailed either. This chapter, what holds most people back from getting approved sooner than they would otherwise, is they are not providing the attention to details in exactly the way that's required. For example, let's just say that you're going to do interviews, and you said that you're going to interview 20 people or until data saturation is achieved. After doing the research at number 17, you have come to the conclusion, based on analyzing the data so far, that data saturation has been achieved. Now, you have to provide the excruciating details on how you determined that at 17 data saturation was achieved. It's not just enough to say at 17 it was achieved. You may have to indicate that after 14 and 15 there were still new themes coming in. After doing 2 more, you notice there were no more themes coming in. So therefore you decide to stop at that point and not do the 20. It's that level of detail which needs to be explained. Another opportunity for excruciating details is if you're going to have somebody transcribe those interviews. If somebody's going to transcribe them, how soon after the interview will they be transcribed? If you had them digitally recorded, would they be transcribed within 24, 48, 72 hours? Would that transcription go back to the person that you interviewed? If so, within how much time? What would be the purpose of giving them those transcripts to look at? What if they didn't return an email or call you back saying that they agree with it? This is the type of details. What kind of details? Yes, excruciating details that has to happen in Chapter 3. If you know the expectation, you can meet the expectation. So if you know that Chapter 3 has to be excruciating in details, then it's going to be easier for you to achieve that. The best plan, if all goes well, will be that the perfect plan for how one believes it will all go once the IRB is approved. Chapter 3 is nothing more than saying if everything goes well, this is exactly what will happen. Now that excruciating details is providing the evidence to suggest exactly how things will go. There's nothing to say that once you actually start collecting your data that everything will go exactly as planned. In most cases, it will, but if it doesn't, don't worry about it. Then you keep your dissertation chair informed and you decide what to do as each step occurs. But overall, if you just look at Chapter 3 from a big picture point of view, let's simplify it a little bit and just say it's the perfect plan for how you believe all of it will go once the IRB has approved your work and you can actually collect your data. Now in the dissertation, Chapter 3 is a little bit different. Not much, but a little bit different. It's written now in a manner that someone will know exactly what happened and the rationale for each step. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, if there's some changes from the proposal to what actually happens in the dissertation, then you just have to change it and modify it. For example, if you had indicated in the proposal that you were going to have 125 usable surveys to run your data, but you ended up only with 115, well, you would write it that you proposed that you would have 125, but you only ended up with 115. And then you would indicate why you only got 115. Now, you may find that using that delta, that difference in the number, could be a recommendation for future research for somebody else if they're going to follow your path with what you've done on how they might be able to get more survey responses because perhaps maybe you did something that precluded you from getting more, or perhaps you didn't use a mailing list like you could have, or perhaps you gave your link to a survey to somebody else and they sent it out instead of you getting all the emails where you could have done follow-ups. There's many different reasons why the dissertation could be a little bit different, but the most important point is for you to know that once you do your data analysis, if things have changed, you just simply go back into Chapter 3 when you're working on your dissertation and make sure that the adjustments have been made. If there is any difference from what was proposed, in what ways are those differences? As I mentioned, if you only got 100 instead of 125, you would indicate why you believe only 100 were achieved. All this is doing is telling the reader that your intention was to do something different and you got something that you did not plan for. And therefore, it may, I'm not saying that it will, but it may have some bearing on the statistical calculations if you have less surveys than you had hoped for. If you used a fair share sample and the sample size said that you needed 125 and you only had 100, well, now you're a little bit less. We just need to know why that happened and in what ways were things different. Again, in the dissertation, here we have excruciating details of exactly what happened. Remember, the proposal is in the future tense. It's the excruciating details of what will occur. Now that the data is collected and you're putting your dissertation together to be approved, now it's the excruciating details of exactly what happened. There may not be much differences, but if there are, you just detail them out so somebody could clearly understand what occurred in the data collection process, and if it was different than what was proposed, why is that the case? Here is a possible sequence that one might use for Chapter 3, particularly if this is for a quantitative study. Now, if it's qualitative, you wouldn't have all these items in here. Now, in this lesson plan for Chapter 3, I will have a different, separate webinar or a lesson on each one of these items here. Each one of these items will be a separate lesson so that you can learn in detail how these areas could be considered and be reflected in a chapter. As you can see here, it starts with a basic chapter introduction and ends with a chapter conclusion like every chapter should. And then it goes into some general information about the research method and design. Then you'll state again the research and interview questions. And much of this is already taken from Chapter 1. Now in Chapter 3, you're just going to expand upon it, give a little bit more information. Then you're going to go into a pilot test and talk about the pilot test. Then your survey population, the qualifications of that group, the survey sample size, give some description of who they are, how they came to be, or what their qualifications are. You give some information how you're going to protect the survey population, make sure that everything's confidential, that there's no potential harm to the people who are going to participate. You'll have the informed consent and confidentiality described in there. Then you'll go into detail about your data collection plan. You'll give information about the types of data that will be collected, your instrument, whether it be a survey, a Likert type survey, or whether it's going to be open-ended questions that you're going to interview people with. You'll talk and show and give some evidence about the reliability and validity of the instruments that you're going to use. You're going to then give some data analysis plan on how you're going to analyze the data, because then in Chapter 4, when it's time, then you're going to include in that chapter all the data that was collected as it was found. And then, of course, you're going to end with chapter conclusion. As I indicated, you can look in ProQuest dissertations for dissertations that were published recently, and I say within the last couple of years, from your university, search by the same research method and design that you plan to apply, and then look at several of the table of contents for Chapter 3. I believe by doing so, you will find probably about 90% of the format that you'll need for your work. Now I want to share some information here. I will give a complete different lesson on this on the research map in the next tool I'm going to give, but I encourage you to consider creating a research map. Now in Chapter 2, I've given some information about creating a concept map, and that may help to put information together on how you will then create an outline for your chapter. The same may occur here, but think of it this way in the sense of a flow chart, that you're going to detail every step of the process on how you're going to collect your data from the beginning to the end, much like a flow chart in a process that you might have in an organization. Now, a lot of my background stems from quality management, and so when I look at processes, we often map them out. And then a flow chart is a great way to see where their decisions have to be made and or it's just a flow of information. Here, one of my mentees was kind enough to allow me to use his work, and you can see he had done a mixed method study. They ended up triangulating. So he has several different pieces here, but you can get a feel for how he did his work. You can see from instrument development process how he created the questions, how he validated them, and he did the interview questions to make sure they were completed. On the other part, he says the instrument development process where he created questions and constructed this Likert type scaling approach. Then he did the information there, and you can see one step at a time. Once he got all that together, then he did a pilot. He validated the pilot, then he had an instrument. Then he went out there and collected his data. Now, your map may look different, and that's fine, but I encourage you to consider doing a flow chart. As I indicated, another lesson in this program will be all about research maps or flow charts that can be a tool to help you. Now, this tool is a very basic tool, and if you have any background in management, you may be familiar with a cause and effect diagram or an Ishikawa diagram. Often this is also called a skeleton or a fishbone diagram because of the skeleton type look that it has of a fish. Now, this is designed to show cause and effect. If you're doing a quantitative study, you may find this helpful, whether you're doing a correlation or a cause and effect study. Now, particularly if you're doing a causality study, this could come in handy. But as you see here in this diagram, you'll see to the far right it says incorrect deliverables. Now, these incorrect deliveries could mean something like Federal Express or a postal service. Now, all the 4 items to the left, where all these arrows are pointed out of each of the items, such as skills, communication, transport, and procedures, are all what's known as independent variables. The incorrect deliveries could be considered a dependent variable. Incorrect deliveries can be influenced by any one of the 4 items to the left, meaning that communication problems or skills of employees each are independent of one another and could cause incorrect deliveries. Same as if transportation fails or if the processes are not put in place. This allows one to see cause and effect. Now, I like to use these tools particularly for quantitative studies because at first it can be applied to help a student understand what the independent variables are to the dependent variable. But as you'll see in the lesson I'll provide, I'll go into depth on each one of these 4 items, and we'll find out that miscommunication or not being skilled enough in understanding the process, there's many different things underneath. And if we take each item and we go in depth on, we can also find the direct connections to creating questions that will be used for the Likert type survey. Because if we start drilling down, we want to be able to show that any question that we use in a Likert type survey is connected to its own independent variable. So when you're able to have a tool like this, you're able to see the relationships, and that's important. And there's nothing wrong with putting this in chapter 3 or that research map. Remember, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. Oftentimes, by using these types of figures and diagrams in your work, people are able to see something without having to read your whole chapter, and I believe that adds value to your work. Again, I'll have a complete lesson plan on the cause and effect diagram, and I'll give examples from one of my mentees who applied this extremely well and was able to reflect the cause and effect diagram in such a manner that it brought much value to his chapter. A couple of the important areas I want to talk about in this lesson. The first one being recorded interviews. I mentioned it briefly a few moments back, but in regards to recording interviews, let's talk again about those details. What kind of details? Yes, excruciating details. How will they be recorded? Will they be recorded on a digital recorder? Will they be recorded on your iPhone? Will they be an audio tape recorder that has actually little cassettes inside of them? Again, we want to know exactly what you're using, so in case somebody wanted to replicate your study, they would use the exact same thing. Or if somebody had pick up your study, and they would need to know exactly how you plan for this to happen. They want to know who will transcribe these interviews. Will it be you? Will it be your high school child? Will it be a service that you use on the internet? Will it be a college graduate? Who will be doing the transcription? Maybe perhaps you have a secretary, an administrative assistant. That person can do it. Perhaps maybe your spouse is going to do it. It really doesn't matter who does it, but we just need to know who is doing it. Now, you really wouldn't want to have somebody who's in grade school do it. Now, if you had somebody who was a child and they were maybe 16, 17, 18, they could do it. There's nothing wrong with that. You would give them the audio, they would listen to it, and they would type it out for you. How long after the interview will transcription occur? We need to know this. This is important. It's important for several reasons. One, because we have to have all the details, but after each interview, how long will it be till the transcription is done? In most cases, with my mentees, I encourage them that within 48 hours to have the transcription completed and send it back through email to that interviewee. Give it back to that interviewee to review for accuracy. We know that sometimes people say things they don't mean, and when they read it, they'll say, wait a minute, I said this, I realize that, but I meant this. So therefore, it needs to be changed. What you're doing through the recording and the transcription and sending it back is verifying the accuracy, and therefore adding more value to your work, making sure things are accurate. So when you start analyzing the data, you have good data. When you start looking at review of the transcripts, how long will you give that person, each interviewee, to review the transcripts? If you get it back to them within 48 hours, how long will you give them? One common approach is to say that once it's sent to them, if you don't hear back from them within 5 days with any changes or edits, that you'll accept it to be approved. You don't have to say, if I don't get it back within 5 days, I'll do another follow-up. They may be busy. They may be on to something else. You've already used up much of their time when you interviewed them. Try not to bother them anymore. And so you can put the caveat that if you don't hear from them within 5 days, that you will assume that they concur with what's in the transcription. This would also be provided into their consent form, indicating that their interview will be recorded, that they will get the recordings back in transcription within 48 hours, and that they will have 5 days to review it. And if not, then you'll go with it as it was decided. Now, these are all the details. What kind of details? Yes, excruciating details that somebody has to have. And many students early on in providing their Chapter 3 draft do not do this excruciating detailed work, or even go into the level that's required for the recording of interviews. This is all very important, and there's more you know about, the easier it is for you then to be able to meet the expectations that are placed upon you. Let's talk a little bit about the pilot study. That's also an important area. Now, the pilot study is the first thing you're going to do after you get your data collected. How will the pilot study be conducted? Will you give the surveys to 2 or 3 people electronically? Will you sit down with 2 or 3, maybe 5 different people and review your open-ended research questions? Will you email them to them first? How exactly will you conduct the pilot study? There are many different ways. I can't address them all, but the very next lesson, lesson 2 in Chapter 3, is going to be all about pilot studies. Who is eligible to be in the pilot study? Ideally, people in the pilot study would have come from the same people who were considered in the survey population. They have to be qualified in the survey population. Oftentimes I get students asking me to be in their pilot when I have no connections or relationship to that survey population. They think, well, you have a PhD and you do all this research, you should be able to do this. That's incorrect. The idea of the pilot study is somebody's going to review the questions for their accuracy. If you're asking me questions about how parents feel about teachers, I really can't answer that question fairly or understand whether the questions are articulated correctly because I don't have any children, and therefore they're not in school. So how do I know what my children are learning? So here's a prime example of somebody who wants to have somebody involved in the pilot who's not eligible. I would not be eligible in that situation. So take a look at what the eligibility requirements are for somebody to be in a pilot study. And even if somebody is qualified and they're one of your dissertation committee members, they should not be included. They should be totally neutral. They should not have any input into this because otherwise it could be a conflict of interest. Participation, are they in the survey population? Once you are completed with the pilot, I suggest that you then do not include them in the survey population. They've already helped you out. Besides, if they are included in the survey population, they have seen the questions where others would not have done it. So each person in the survey population would not have the fair or same opportunity to see the questions at the same time. First time, or whether it be through interviews being asked the first time. My suggestion is that once you have your pilot done, let's just say you had 5 people out of the total survey population who you involved in the pilot study. Once the pilot study is done, then thank them for the help and let them go. And then go and do your research with the remaining survey population. What's the reason for the pilot? A lot of times people struggle early on when they're writing Chapter 3. And I've had it happen many times where the student wants the people in the pilot to actually answer the questions. and then want to then analyze that data somehow, some way. There is no reason for that. I can think of no reason, and if your dissertation chair thinks differently, then of course have that conversation and find out why and exactly how you should go about it. But the idea is not for people in the pilot study to actually do it and then analyze the data. You want them to look at your survey instrument. If you're going to be asking open-ended questions, you want them to help you to understand whether each question you're going to be asked is written in such a manner as so the people could answer it adequately and provide you with the type of data that you need. Or perhaps if they're going to review a Likert type survey, whether it's 12 questions or 120 questions, it's not so much about them answering the question to what extent or to what degree they agree. It's about them reading the questions and asking them then, does each question make sense? Now, certainly if you have 120 questions, you might want to be very nice to the people involved in your pilot because they have to go through each question. That could be a laborious process. But the idea for the pilot is for people to help make sure that your survey is either readable or understandable in a manner that's going to help you get the data you need. There's no reason, again, to, once you do the pilot, to consolidate any information or data at all. That's not what the pilot's about. If you're uncertain, read more about pilot studies, their purpose, and how to do them. The other area that I'll speak about here is an important area and conclude the lesson plan on the important areas is safeguarding artifacts. In your proposal, we want to know how you're going to safeguard the information. For example, you did the pilot test and you had open-ended questions and you gave it to 5 people and then they gave you feedback in return. What are you going to do with that feedback? If it's on paper, what will you do with those papers? Will you save them? Will you crumple them up and throw them in the dumpster? How will you do it? Will you shred them? Will you put them in a safe? Now, something to be aware of is that we want you to keep all the materials for your work. Some universities require a minimum of 12 months. Other universities require a minimum of 24 months. Even the notes that you might get from people involved in the pilot, or if you had people do all the surveys on paper, you need to keep all those surveys. The idea is that people may want to see that information again and look at your data and make sure it was analyzed correctly. What will be saved? Ideally, everything's going to be saved. Even if your work is in a computer file, you want to save that to a disk, and you want to save it in a place that's going to be secured. Whether it be paper or anything electronically, you want to make sure that you save. You definitely want to keep everything through the end of your dissertation, and then at that point, you just make sure that everything's saved in accordance with your university guidance. In most cases, 24 months is more than enough. In many cases, 12 months is enough to be able to secure the data, because after a certain point, your dissertation will be published, and if anybody wants to look at anything, they may want to do it within the first year. This is much like in the United States, where they require us to save our tax documentation for 7 years, because somebody may come back on an audit within 7 years and say, show me what you have, all your notes, all your receipts and things like that. Same thing is situated here, but you don't have to save it for as long. So again, how long? It's going to be dependent on your university. I think if you put 12 months as a minimum, you'll be fine. If there's no law or policy, if you will, at your university, I encourage you to go with 12 months. If they want something different, they'll let you know when your proposal is getting approved. Where are you going to secure this information? Is it going to be in a couple different folders in between the mattresses in your bed with all your money that you saved there? Or is it going to be in a safety deposit box? Is it going to be in a file cabinet in your home office or a secure locked cabinet in your workplace? The idea being is we want to know how you're going to protect this information, as some of it's going to be sensitive, perhaps confidential in what people have signed or said in their work when they've given you answers. So we want to know that not anybody anywhere can just get easy access to this. If you're going to store it in the workplace, then somebody might question how many people will have access to it. Oftentimes, the best thing you need to do to get through this phase is to indicate that you will have it in a locked file cabinet in your home. This way we know exactly where it is. We know the access to it is very limited. You may have a safe in your home. You certainly don't need to put it in your safety deposit box in a bank. That's not what anybody is requiring. We just want to make sure that if it's being protected and to what extent and how long will it be secured. How will it be secured is important in the sense that, if it's in your home office, is it in a locked up file cabinet? If it's in the workplace, is it in a locked up file cabinet? If it's at home, is it perhaps in a safe that you have in your bedroom? Well, you don't have to put where the safe is. You just put it in a home safe or in a home locked file cabinet in the office. You don't have to say it's on the third file cabinet from the left and the third drawer from the top. The idea being is just giving information to help others realize that you're going to protect this data. And then when the time is up, what you're going to do with it. You're going to shred it, or the disks you're going to break in half and then throw them away. Other information is required. Now, depending on your research, you may have certain things that you're going to have to secure where others do not. Some people, particularly psychologists, do art-type therapy. And they may give their patients or their survey population a project where they draw something. Now, these pictures are probably on large scale pieces of paper, like we might find on a flip chart. So this is a little bit different, but still we need to know how it's going to be secured. At a certain point, yes, you can fold them up and you can put them into a file container and still be fine. But sometimes there are things that you may have to roll up and put into some sort of tube, and then say that you're going to secure that in your home, perhaps in a bedroom somewhere where people won't be able to get at it. Again, it's not so much about that it has to be secured for a thief not to get to it, but just so we know that you're not just going to take those drawings with people's names on them and notes on the back and just throw them out in the office trash can where somebody might get it and it could be found and somebody might look at it and not realize what they have. Methodology in reference to the chapter. This is not about the research methodology, but it's just the methodology is often the heading of this chapter, chapter 3. And just to simplify things, it's the process to collect data and produce information. A lot of people make chapter 3 to be out this huge chapter and it's hard to put together. Again, I tend to believe that this is the easiest chapter. If you're putting a lot of undue stress upon yourself, I encourage you to not do so, but simply look at it that this is the process that you're going to describe to collect data, which ultimately produces information. In reality, all you're really going to do in this chapter is let others know you know what you're going to do or that you did, depending on whether it's a proposal or a dissertation. Let's keep it simple. Chapter 3 is just telling other people what you're going to do and how you plan to do it, or if it's a dissertation, what you did and how it came to be, the rationale for each step. In the reflective summary, I just want to give you some information to kind of help secure the end of this lesson, is that in this lesson I gave a quick introduction about the lesson program itself and who I am. I gave you some basic information about what is chapter 3. Again, I think chapter 3 is the easiest of the chapters to put together in a proposal. In the proposal, I gave you some insights about what needs to be in there as compared to the dissertation. Again, only changes would occur in the dissertation other than from future tense to past tense would be any changes in the actual research process that occurred as compared to how it was proposed. I gave some insights on one slide of possible sequence of headings and subheadings in chapter 3. Again, I'll go through each of those areas in subsequent lessons here in chapter 3 that you can play at any time. I also described actually 3 important areas to consider, being the pilot test, giving some information about how to record and what to do with the recordings, and then how to secure all the information once you're done and how you're going to protect it. Then I just gave you some brief information about the methodology, saying that this is a chapter where you're just going to share information about what you plan to do, and this way people will know that you understand how to collect your data and the importance of each step in the process. Again, I'm Dr. Rich Schuttler. I want to thank you for listening in on this lesson and in the program. I do believe that education is a lot like life. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And if you haven't taken anything away yet, as one key tip to remember, it should be excruciating details. If you understand the aspect of excruciating details, you can certainly meet that expectation, and I'm sure you'll be able to exceed it. If I can help you out, please go to my website, look at drrichschuttler.com. This is Chapter 3, Lesson 1. If you haven't seen the programs yet for Chapters 1 and Chapters 2 on my website under Taking the B Out of ABD, you can see how you can have access to the 14 lessons in Chapter 1 and the 8 lessons in Chapter 2. Thank you for listening to this program. I hope this has helped you get started in Chapter 3. I will see you in the next lesson.